Hi, Aurelio.
There was beautiful synchronicity. Did you hear of the clap? Tuning is there in the space.
How are you today?
I'm fine. I'm actually always happy if there's a bit of a resting day in between, because then nature takes over. You know, if human activity comes to rest, then nature has more place and it can spread. And I find it just very nourishing then. So a real resting day.
Beautiful. On this resting day, could you maybe tell us a bit more about how the sonic journey for you started?
I think actually, for me, nature was always the reference point. I grew up on the edge of a small town, and I was so fascinated as a kid, lying in bed. Often I had deep dreams in the night, and then I was just waiting for the first birds to awaken. And it was always so surprising for me that the birds awaken before light is coming, or just on the brink of light coming. So I very much identified with this awakening of the world, and one by one, different voices coming in. And then, of course, growing up in Europe, I grew up in Austria, then suddenly in winter, it's all silent, you know. And so then the change of the seasons, then waiting in spring for the cuckoo to arrive, and then know all the flowers are coming and all of that. So I think for me, actually, there was always, I related to nature more than I related to society in that way. So I was always listening to nature, going down to the river. That was my most happy spaces, when I could possibly be with nature and forget myself.
Beautiful. And then how did that evolve?
Even then, growing up, as I said, I kind of felt a little bit, I couldn't 100% relate to the society, to the environment I grew up, to the time. And so music became a very important part. I grew up in the 60s with the singer-songwriters, with all that beautiful poetry of a new beginning. It was kind of like the cultural revolutions of the students on university. And it was also, I think it was the opening of the global context. Yes, 1968, basically, how to say, that was the time where we all got TVs, because there was the moon landing of the Americans. And through that, basically, then we got that first image of the planet as a whole. This beautiful blue planet floating in space. And also somehow this sense that we're all together on one planet. And so for me, very strongly, my most favorite subject in school was geography. I just became very interested in all the different places and cultures of the world. And then basically through radio, we also got the different music of the world. And I could very much identify with the movement of the protest songs, you know. There was, like, let's say, nuclear power came in. There was still the aftermath of the Second World War, with this image of the atomic explosion, and then the protest against it, and the protest against the wars. And that was all in music. And it was an interesting transition from folk music and entertainment music. That music had lots of meaning. It was very meaningful. And then I remember that was the time also Bob Marley came in, and then he again talked about a revolution in human society against suppression of the poor working class and all of that. So that really gave me meaning, and actually churned my interest that I wanted to study music. I wanted to understand music and its place in society. I had learned classical guitar in school for quite a few years, I think 6 years. But then there was also the problem that I basically, I learned playing from sheet. You know, you learn reading music, but then if somebody took away the sheet, I didn't know what to play. So then, and that was a bit painful emotionally as a teenager, because I couldn't play what I felt. So there was a bit of a gap between my music playing. I played old classical works and an emotional relation to it, which I got out of rock and pop music and blues and whatever came up, the genres of that time. So I was then interested in the music ethnology, the music of the people, original music. When we heard the first African music or Indonesian gamelan music and things, that was really fascinating me. Let's say the different sounds of the world, the different soundscapes of the world. And then actually came that strong call. I didn't want to study just sitting in a university. I said, I have to go. I have to move, I have to experience it. And that set me out on a long travel of about 5 years. It took me 5 years, one time around the planet. And I stayed mostly in the South Pacific region, which was very beautiful because the people were very gentle, very welcoming, and I could stay in native villages and there had some very significant experiences with music. Of music and, let's say, music and ceremony, music and healing, how it was used in accidents in Papua New Guinea in the forest when something happened. And then from that place, I mean, there were lots of experiences because it took a few years in staying with indigenous folk in that part of the world. And then when I came back to Europe, that churned me actually. I wanted to understand, how does music work?
Can you maybe share one of these deep experiences when you were staying?
I think the most significant one was, it was a strong image because when I entered Papua New Guinea, that was in the beginning of the 80s, and it was quite, how they say, original, primitive still. And people said, no, I cannot go to the highlands, they are headhunters and they will eat us and all of that. But I was just, it was my early 20s and I was in this strong adventure spirit. And walked for weeks and stayed in the interior with this village. And it was always a bit difficult first. I mean, they didn't know, you know, when we met, when we encountered each other, we were feeling our noses, and because we were white like ghosts probably. And so anyway, but they accepted us. I was traveling with a companion at that time. And one point, so there was the village, and then outside of we walked about 4 or 5 hours to a place where a cultivation place was happening. And it so happened that in the afternoon or something, there was a big shout, and one woman hurt herself and kind of like broke her leg. And it was very awkward because the bone was kind of sticking out. You could really see the breakage of the bone, severe breakage. And we were like a few hours away from the village, and from that village it would have taken maybe 10 days to the next roadhead. And so we were just really in the middle of nowhere. And it was for me so astounding to see how they were dealing with it. You know, how everybody ran around. Suddenly it was like the beehive was alive and everybody had something to do. And they brought plants and they brought it back in alignment, and then they bandaged it with plant material. And of course, that person was in excruciating pain. And then a few people took all the twigs, took twigs around and started to beat her body, kind of like rattling or something, like this. And then they calmed her and brought her into a state that she almost like fell asleep through a tranquilizer. Yeah? And that was very astounding for me to see how the effect of just the calming and that communal action that they basically brought her back, and then that person healed very quickly. She was bandaged, and she was there was the trauma, the first trauma of the accident, but then she was taken care, and she was actually recovering quite well, bandaged. I mean, I left then after a few weeks, so I didn't see her walking yet, but actually there was just an accident, and there was the immediate caretaking, and then there was the period of healing. And one time, I mean, that's a bit difficult maybe to tell, but we've been also out, that was before that incident, we've been out and then about 2-3 hours away from that village, and then it started to rain, and it was a very difficult terrain going, how to say, in the jungles through mudways. And then actually, I remember when she was one of the elder women, again a woman there actually, and it started to rain, and we were already sitting and waiting, when can we go down that slope? And then she started to do some chant, and I felt like the chant was in sync with the raindrops. We had those big leaves holding and hiding under the drops, and then the way she chanted and came in sync with the rain. And at one point, kind of like, I was so fascinated by that synchronization. And then the rain stopped, and I somehow put it in my mind. I said, oh, she made the rain stop. Yeah. So it was kind of like, I think in my innocence, there were experiences like this. Also then in Indonesia and in China, where I encountered the deep emotional impact of music. I had this experience that was in a southern province. I think it was in Yunnan, where lots of minorities live in China. And I passed by at the house. This was this beautiful middle-aged city far away from everything else. And I heard this amazing, beautiful, very touching, sad music from a courtyard. And I peeped into the door. You know, they were all walled, basically, in inner courtyards. And then the people were very friendly and said, you come in. And then I realized that it was kind of like a funeral. You know, there was somebody was there actually, how to say, being readied for a funeral. And many people were crying. And I just came in as a passing by traveler. But the music was so touching that I actually started to cry with the people. I had no relationship, I didn't know who it was and stuff, but the music was touching me so that I started actually to sob, and it was a strong physical impact. And then again, I thought, you know, when I went out of it, I said, how did that happen? So small experiences like this, they were they shook up my being in one way, and somehow brought me in touch with that sense, hey, there's immense power in music. And so when I came back to Europe, I mean, after those 5 years, and it took a long time, I came back with the Trans-Siberian Railway at that time, passing through Mongolia, and I will not go into this, a book of stories, basically. But then actually I was really interested, and I visited some summer courses in University of Salzburg on music therapy. I wanted to understand, what are the principles? How does music work? What makes it work? You know, how to say, on these journeys, there were many different layers. Mostly I stayed with tribal people in the jungles and on islands and all of that. But then I remember in the Far East, but it was also for me one of an amazing mixture of culture, happened actually in Hong Kong, where one of our friends is from there. And so I stayed actually in a Sikh Gurudwara. When I came back to Hong Kong, basically back into civilizations of many years out, and that was after Papua New Guinea, I contrived actually, I had some heavy malaria, which broke out there because I couldn't use native medicine anymore and stuff. And then I stayed in this Sikh Gurudwara temple in downtown Hong Kong. the highways going above it and stuff like this. And it was very, how to say, it was like home. There was so much caretaking, there was good Indian food and chapatis and also daily music, daily chanting. But what was for me so interesting, that contrast between being there in the city and once I kind of like recuperated, I moved out to an island. I don't know anymore. I think it must have been Lantau, one of those big islands. And then basically you can stay away from the city in monasteries, where all the very strong music is happening in early morning. And for me, that was, I think that's where another portal opened, especially for me then when I stayed in Korea, because there I really had more time in monasteries. And 4 o'clock in the morning, it was not before the birds were waking up, actually, the bells started, the gongs, the temple drums. And that was very powerful because actually, how to say, directly from the sleep world, we were pulled into a complete different world, let's say, of half an hour drumming. And kind of like that was an interesting transition. Maybe not even time to wake up, yeah, from a dream sleep world, stepping into a world of strong intensity and unknowingness. I didn't really know what was going on in that way. But it was also with prostrations in Buddhist temples, very intense. We had to do 108 prostrations and stuff like this, to the sound of the drums. And that often, how to say, because it was in this state of in-between, that was before actually the light came into the day, that often through this intensity and when those practices were finished and just sitting there in the silence, it was like as if the silence was ringing and the whole body was vibrating, while there was no impact anymore. It was usually in the experience afterwards. Yeah, I think maybe that was the meaning also of those morning rituals, to charge the system, to invigorate the system or wake it up or intensify something. And then for me, those were, I cannot say I had a clue what meditation was, but then the space was created. I think through the help of the intensity of the sound and its impact on the body, the silence was so rich and charged that there was also no thought there. There was just vibration. I felt just my being vibrating, and that was very, nourishing. It was like I longed for it, and I was waiting the next day that it would happen, but it wouldn't happen every day. Of course, I don't know what the factors were that brought it together, but to be in that space where the whole physical body is charged. It's almost like it's plugged in somewhere and it's vibrating. So that was how to say, I cannot even say, but like a strong confirmation that we are vibration. Yeah, and we just need to kind of like bring that instrument, our instrument, bring it alive, do something with it so that it can be in that state of heightened vibration. I had some deep experiences. In New Zealand once, I was volunteering in a special needs center with Down syndrome people, and I don't even know which instruments we had. I think I had a small lyre, string instrument, and some drums and flutes, and basically, and then also must have been recorded music. I don't know if you ever experienced it with Down syndrome people. When you dance, kind of like it's like you come into a weightless state. they loved music, you know, they could be very dull and very domestic and not moving and no energy. But with music, it was like they were waking up, and then especially moving, I came into this complete flow state and forgot myself that I was actually in an hour and supposed to teach something. There was a beautiful encounter also. And for me also very important, let's say, that opened a space of deep humility. Because you couldn't say, you know, maybe there was no cognitive, strong factor there, but there was this capacity of completely letting go into the waves of music, which was also a fascinating experience. Then I realized, hey, maybe because I wanted to understand, I wanted to study everything. And to see, hey, those people, they don't need an understanding of it, they just disappear into the waves of sound.
Have you ever been lost?
Lost?
Yes.
Yeah,
like
deeply.
Purpose in music.
No, let's say first, I mean, that's an interesting question that you're posing it, because I've been lost quite a few times. I was very daring in my young years, and often I overstepped my limits, or maybe I needed that the universe would show me my limits, because often I got completely lost in circumstances, in geographical locations for hours. And I was one time in Borneo, terribly lost in a swamp, and I thought I would not get out of it alive. And one time I was lost in Japan. I was lost quite a bit in nature. You know, I think I wanted to lose myself or become one in nature. And I was daring to go further and further, away from civilization. One time I got lost, terribly lost in Japan. I was just walking out in the afternoon from some friend's house, and it got dark and I couldn't find my way out of the bamboo forest, but I had actually a copy of Savitri, this epic poem of Sri Aurobindo, with me. And it said, and I opened it up, and there was a line which said, I forgot it now, I wandered lost in woods. And I made actually a song out of this whole episode. And once I got also 2 times I was on the verge of drowning in the ocean. So I think I was too daring and needed to find my place somehow in nature and in the universe. But after this, my last experience, which happened after many years in Korea, which was very strong on the brink and an encounter with death, I said, if I'm coming out alive of this situation, I'll be a really good boy and I will behave and I won't do it again. And I cannot say in those situations, because often they were coming on the edge of survival. I don't know if now I'm saying even as you come into a state of being when you're on that edge of life, where everything, all the sensory input becomes one. I cannot even say now that there was, if I recall it, if there was a specific listening experience. I don't think so, because if you're in such an emergency, your whole, I think the chemistry in the body is in a complete different state, where everything is kind of like excited or anxious and all of that. But I remember in that situation, in Korea, it was in a national park, and I thought I wanted to be with the brown bears, and just came into a very difficult valley and into a canyon. You see, I think what happens in those situations, that the body is actually, I think it's the adrenaline in the body. So you're in this heightened, that's what I wanted to say, you're in this heightened state of awareness, where everything is like zzz, where you're so, everything is charged and electrified. because every moment, I think it's also possibly the fear of death. And then, so what I wanted to say in those situations, what was very important, and I had it a few times also in the ocean, this urge or the absolute necessity to calm down, and to come from this state of zzz, and this excitement into. I remember when that was in the jungle in Borneo, actually in this badly swamp, and I came out of it and was again in the swamp. And often it was water that much, and it was so hot and humid. And I actually had put all my belongings into a backpack, and was actually kind of like not only in underwear. And sometimes I would just like see if I could hang the backpack somewhere and lie in the shallow water to cool my system, because the heartbeat was so strong. And so there actually, I think maybe if I can say that I learned something from those situations, was the capacity of calming the system and coming back into a state of equilibrium. What we maybe say in the healing arts, that the body has a natural equilibrium, a homeostatic balance. Yeah. So that often in those situations was very necessary. And sometimes I had to stay overnight or 2 nights out in the wilderness and stuff like this. And so that was a good learning. I think I needed those experiences on the edge of survival. And then also to understand how fragile life is.
Can you tell us a bit how you came to India?
Studying in the West, studying music therapy and music related things, there's always somehow from behind, always there appears that the symbol of Om and the knowledge of the concept of Nada Brahman. And then again, I actually felt like I need to find out directly from it. And so that brought me later, actually in later years, to India. And I was actually called through a deep mystical experience which I had in the mountains. In the winter, I lived in a farmhouse it was snowed in, and for 3 months I couldn't walk out of the valley or something. I had all my food there and stuff. And I had a very deep inner experience. And then I somehow, through this inner experience, I got in contact with Pondicherry Ashram and Sri Aurobindo and the mother. The link was a simple incense package from there. Yeah? And so then I came in a Western winter. I could close that farmhouse. And actually my prime motivation was really music, to understand music. And the first thing I picked up, I met somebody and wanted to learn. I heard this amazing bansuri player in the Pondicherry Ashram, and I wanted to learn from him. And then I said, no, I can teach you something much better. I teach you the whole Indian cosmology and all of that. So very interesting how it unfolded, but I picked up on this first trip, actually, I was learning with a Hindustani vocal singer and got my first tambura. And then I studied the books, whatever was available there. The library in Sri Aurobindo Ashram was an exceptional library, actually. And I found this one book on traditional Indian music, and the way how you really experience it is that for 1 year, you just have to sing Om. And so I took my tambura home into my farmhouse in the Alps, and that's what I did. For a year, I basically practiced 2 hours, just Om. And in those practices, you go up and down. Sometimes it's exciting, sometimes it's very boring. Nothing happens, and then possibly there's a breakthrough. And one hears things which one couldn't think of it before. And so I think actually I made a commitment, I pulled it through, and I think in that way it was like an initiation where I felt like now I'm somehow in, I can relate to it. But then actually a Swami from Rishikesh, I stayed there, visited there in the Shivananda ashram. He said, I have to go to the West and I have to study the Western knowledge systems. Yeah. So I was, for a few years, kind of like I never enrolled in a university course again because I ran away from university, but I did summer courses and seminars and retreats and learned with visiting faculties and teachers. And that was basically on the background of that inner practice of sound, of just toning. And a crucial point was actually when I studied was a German professor. His name was Manfred Junius, and he was actually, I got to know him through plant alchemy. He was an alchemist in plant medicine, but he also was a musician, surbaha player, and then he announced a workshop on the alchemy of music. And that was very exceptional. So I remember walking down from the mountains, hitchhiking to Munich and all of that. And that was completely transformative. It was my first deep experience of raga and the possible impact it did. So I remember he exposed us, he played live to raga, we were relaxing and listening to it. And we felt all like a bit disorientated and taken apart and not in a very comfortable space. It was very disharmonious. I felt it was very unusual to listen to that music. And then he said, okay, this is what that raga is doing to us. And then he said, don't worry, actually, I just wanted to show you this alchemical process of dissolving and taking apart in its constituents, how to say, a whole thing, and then bringing it together in a new harmonization. So then he played the second raga, and I think that was actually Bhupali. And that raga it has such a harmonic structure that after this one, I mean, we must have been like 12 participants. We all felt completely new. And that lasted for weeks for me. So it was really, he took us into this process of looking of what doesn't work, what is not fitting together, what is not in harmony, and then actually putting it together again. And that was so fascinating for me that I thought, if there are cultures in the world, definitely Indian culture is one of the cultures which holds the secret of sound. And that basically also brought me back then after the Western studies, where it's also limited in the West because in the academics, in music therapy, okay, when you come into practice and work with people, then you can have deep experiences. But what was very important, I think, at that time was to understand when you look, how is music working as a whole? How did this raga actually, what were the mechanics that it worked in such a way? And at that time I remember, because he didn't even have a tabla player. It was just basically the melodic patterns which he used in that. But then in the study, how to say, it was like, what's the function of a drone, of a sustained sound? What does it do if you sing on a drone for an hour? What does it do to the physical system? What does it do if you play in the background of a specific rhythm? Yeah? Of a specific pulse, which is in a specific speed. What happens when you speed it up, when you slow it down? You feel an immediate effect on the body. And then what also came into the picture was in Vienna, there was this worldwide unique Institute of Harmonic Science, which was based on Pythagorean studies, which brought together basically music and mathematics, the harmonic structure of music. So that was fascinating because what in that institute, what they were exploring was what are the principles in musical sound, yeah, the structure of the harmonic series, and then seeing actually that law of music is we can find in all expressions of life. Yeah, we can find it in organic nature, how it's growing. The proportions of music are there in the cycles, in the rhythms of life. You can find them in the rhythms of the planetary systems, how they're moving. And so that was very nourishing for me. I've studied, especially the Greek approach to music and the Greek philosophers. So that I felt like, I got in contact with my own root. Because the European culture basically roots itself back to the Greek culture. But then on that base, actually, I felt ready that I could, I was really longing to come back to India and study deeper. Because over 5 years, I did this practice, based on a drone. And then after 2 years, 3 notes came into the play. And then I heard that the Vedic chanting basically is based on 3 notes. And then came in this exploration of Samaveda, of 5 note scales, and from there the whole gamut of pentatonic scales. That was occupying me for many years. I found a reference in an Indian Shastra on if you really want to do healing with music, then do it with Audava ragas, with 5-tone scales. And then I said, oh, that's it, there's a key, there's a secret key. And then it took me years to look on 5-tone scales all over the world, and I realized that all the indigenous folk and folk music is mostly based on 5-tone scales. And it doesn't matter in all climatic regions, from the Eskimos to Africa, from South America to Romania to China to Indonesia. And that's a subject which I hope actually I should actually bring it together. And now, after 25 years of working with it, say, hey, what's really behind it? Very beautiful. And through that study, I felt like I got in contact with the primary music making of humanity. Yeah, because I remember at that time when I was in Borneo with those headhunters, and he played his instrument. And I had a lyre with me again, and I said, oh, he's playing that same raga again, the same scale. I tuned my instrument to it and played with him. And he was like, how is it possible that you can play the same scale? I said, well, this scale is a universal scale of humanity. And then you find it in 40 different cultures. He said, no, possibly we learned it from our ancestors. I said, no, we learned it from our human ancestors. It's there for all of us. So through this, it was almost like step by step, building block by building block, all those things came together. I think it's a big story, and I get lost in it to see, but the fascinating thing was that within Indian music, you can find a reference to all those phenomena of sound and music. That means all the scales, all the possible scales around the globe, you find them in the system of Indian ragas. All the possible rhythms which you have, which in the West, we're not using 11-beat or 13-beat or 7-beat cycles. So you find them in Indian music, and they're even classified and they're introduced. So I feel like and one big gift basically coming to India for me was coming to Auroville, coming into a context of synthesis. Because basically, Auroville is based on the vision of Sri Aurobindo, and who was joined then by the mother who brought all the Western tradition with him, and it's a place of synthesis where all the discoveries of the different human cultures are coming together. And I feel very fortunate to be able to work in that context of integral yoga, because it wants to look into all the origins of humanity, because there's a strong vision into the future of humanity. And as I came with this aspiration for music, so then of course the question is, what, let's say, more than half of my life I spent, what was the role of music in the original cultures, in ceremony, in healing, in magic, in education, in community building. And now actually the aspiration is there, what's the role of music in the making of a new humanity, of a transformation of humanity.
What you just said was very interesting. What's the role of music in making a new humanity?
As I had mentioned, my first kind of like encounter with the power of music was in my teenage, with all popular music basically. But then actually it was also, and then in the context of indigenous music, there was this beautiful learning that whereas in the West, music basically was all around, it was like an industry. It was like a commercial enterprise, and music was almost like caged in that place and caged in different genres and classes and certain classes of society. Some went to the opera in their best dresses, and some basically the hippies, they were half naked and listening to their music. So there was also this classification of music, but there was a big industry behind it, and the commercialization. Music was almost like a product and you had to buy it. And for me, it was so healing, I tell you. Often I was touched to tears in these indigenous societies when I saw that music is not only for the specialists. In those societies, everybody was doing music. So music, I realized, had a strong, which in the West also it had a strong role of building community for celebrations, for marriages and different functions. No, music had its role there. But then there was the second line of exploration, music and healing in music therapy, and the possible role of music and medicine. I remember one time I stayed with a gynecologist in Korea, and his wife became pregnant, and then I told him that in the West we can use music in the hospitals, and then he basically was the pioneer of introducing music into hospitals, into birth clinics in Korea. And then, of course, in the Indian context, music was interesting. I looked for references of music and healing in the Indian scriptures, but actually it almost said, no, don't worry about this and this. Music is for liberation. Music is for moksha. Music is for enlightenment. So then actually I think that's definitely a gift of the Indian culture and of the mystic culture, the role of music as a communication and of a linkage, how to say, with the numinous, with the unknown of creation. So music and community building, music and medicine, and in Greek culture, music and spirituality and the mystery of life, and in, not only in Greek culture, in Chinese culture also very strong, music and the role in education, in building character, in grooming, also how to say, for cognitive learning. We know the effect of those children who learn an instrument, basically, how much advantage they have to other children who don't have that chance. So let's say, so basically we are coming back into that central role of music in culture. And I was very happy actually that was very early in the making of SVARAM, and we haven't talked about it, because through my passion of music, I also was looking for possibilities for musical instruments, and we have beautiful indications from the yoga, from the mother, of the role of music. And because the mother herself was actually playing organ music, and in the ashram school there were many musicians there. And so through my passion of music, I was involved in the project Instruments for a New Music Pedagogy. And out of this one, basically, we created SVARAM. Because I was involved in village work, and then those people needed some work, and that's how SVARAM Musical Instruments was created. And now I have to see how I wanted to connect it to this role. So then what an additional factor came in, music and matter, vibration and matter. I asked myself, I was not really into craft or business or anything of that. At one point I said, why did Mother put me into this situation that we're working with metals and glass and stone and all those different materials? And then actually at the beginning we all explored the resonating quality of materials. And then I said, and then I'm jumping now with so many people coming into SVARAM, young people from all over the world, and being interested into the role, into the function, into the magic, into the working of sound and vibration. I realized that this young generation, we're all on the brink of human evolution, where we realize the material body or the materialistic worldview is only touching on the surface of something, and behind it is a whole world of vibration. And one way of accessing that world is actually through listening to ourselves. Yeah, that's what all meditative practices are. And then basically also through playing with vibration. So what I'm saying nowadays is, I call those young people, they're all sound pilgrims, because possibly the human species, we are evolving further. And definitely one of the next steps of evolution is that we are sensitizing or heightening our senses, our sensory awareness, our sensory capacity, hopefully into higher layers of the mind and intuitions. And that means also, Sri Aurobindo speaks about the higher senses, the capacity of the higher senses. And I think music, sound, playing with sound is one of those entries and a playful way to learn about the world of vibration. So there is this concept of Nada Brahman, the whole world, or the creator is creating through sound, or sound is the creator. Yeah, all creation comes out of sound. And there's a beautiful esoteric practice, Nada Yoga, which basically trains us to follow that stream of that sound. And the amazing thing is it's actually, in one way, a rather simple practice of listening. But we know what it means when we go into listening spaces and listening from the world, listening to the world, and then slowly maybe withdrawing from the world and listening inside. There's still lots of different vibrations, different layers of reality, no? So that this whole complexity of listening behind the thought process, yeah? And then maybe listening into those deeper waves of the emotions and instincts and all those things which are coming up. So there are it's a twofold way, the process of Nada Yoga. One is going inside and into this pure receptive poise of listening through, going deeper and deeper with the listening. And I'm not sure if it ever stops. It just becomes subtler and deeper. And then in the practice, there's the other part of it, where it basically invites us from the depths, what's arising from the depths. And that practice usually goes through toning, expression. So if the first part is an impressive journey, the second part is, how can I manifest that subtle vibration or this deep experience? How can that be the foundation for everything I'm doing in the world? Yeah? How can I bring that sound forward? And so then it starts basically with being in the depths and seeing what's at the core, how can I come in contact with it, and what is expressing itself from that depth. And that's, I think, that's also the coming in touch with that part of reality where the mantras are arising from. Yeah. Okay, we said the rishis received the mantras also out of the subtle. But it's basically, I think it's treading that edge between the material body and world and the subtler and subtler reaches of reality. And so then sound has the capacity of diving into the depths through listening and going into deeper and deeper layers of it, and then actually harnessing that depths of origin or of silence and creating from that place. Creating through voice, yeah, and creating through tone, creating through mantras, finding one expressions, coming into mudras, coming into movement. And so then there's a chance actually that whatever, if we are in this practice, whatever we do in our life, that it comes and is connected to a deeper origin. So you can say sound is like it's an amazing instrumentation and a tool to dive deep into the mystery of our life and actually learn to work from the depths and come into an expression. And we are so blessed that actually music is all about playing. So while in one way it sounds all very serious, you know, in Nada yoga practices, but actually how we really learn as humans, as children, is through play. So then you have these fascinating things that at the beginning of SVARAM, we created all instruments which can be played by everybody. And it's not about learning a specific technique and that you have to first seriously practice, that you don't make a mistake on that instrument, but you can take those simple xylophones or glockenspiels or whatever they are, or even the ocarinas and the flutes and the bells. You can play them and you have an experience of sound. And with that sound, actually, that sound manifesting, it's a sensory experience. I can feel it, I can relate to it, but it still has a mystery inside. It's there and it's not there. The sound comes out of somewhere, yeah, and it disappears into where. So I think in most of the sacred traditions, that was the function of sound. Sound is a bridge between this and the other side of reality. Yeah? And that's why basically it was always used in education, that we know, okay, in education we have to learn the works of the world, but we also want to learn what is behind life. Yeah? And what are the means that I can connect with a deeper and a higher reality? So I would consider this is the prime function of sound. And it's basically, let's say, if a manager comes home from his work and is very stressed and is very tired, and I had quite a few people, you know, in India, traditionally in every house you have a puja place. You know, and then people, they don't want to be stuck in traditions, or they don't want to be stuck in superstition and belief systems. And then maybe then they go the other side and then they lose all context, you know, with connecting with some fundamentals. And then I remember I had quite a few people, I said, no, you need your puja place in the house, but it doesn't have to be a religious thing. It can be a simple bell, and it can be some plants, and it can be maybe a little fountain. And so when people come home from a very stressful job in the IT world or something like this, they can settle in, they can refresh themselves, and they just can play with sound. And then that simple play with sound, actually, I'm not sure if I can say it can replace basically a religious context, but I believe in that universal power of music and sound and its expressions and vibrations, that it might be actually, how to say, possibility, because you have all the science of physics and acoustic comes into sound. So actually, I think we can have what Sri Aurobindo talks about, what's a religion of humanity. Where, because we see that the old religions, they all create conflict. And wars, most of the wars of humanity are actually because of ideologies. And with sound, actually, I think it's such a universal thing. I had mentioned that one, we didn't finish that. And a big inspiration for me came in the work with SVARAM, when I got a call from New York University from a friend I had been teaching in Israel in one way, how to say, on this difficult conflict with Palestine and Israelis on music therapy and making music with both sides. And a colleague of that professor called me from New York and says, Aurelio, United Nations approached us and the Sustainable Development Goals were defined and they were running for 5 years, and suddenly we realized, well, all those things which we want to achieve in those goals, in nature, many animal species, they don't have to worry about shelter and food. It's all a given, yeah? And so the question came up, what is really human culture? What is at the essence of human culture? And then they basically said, well, music is one of those primal expressions of human culture. And we also, how to say, to come to the real deeper purpose of human existence and the role of the human species, we have to dive into the cultural aspect of it. It cannot be just through material sustainability goals, yeah? Or goals of equality and gender balance and all of that. And they defined, okay, initiated the project Music as a Natural Resource for all humanity. And then they were looking for where is music used in different ways to enhance human community, human culture, problem solving through natural catastrophes and in health. And so basically this project was created, and SVARAM was one of the first 50 projects identified and adopted by this initiative. I think now there are more than 150 projects internationally. And it basically gave me this encouragement, yes, there's so much more behind music than that product and commodity that it was made in the West. Music has a central role in human culture, and we are harnessing and reimagining it and finding its purpose, as we said, in community building, in education, in medicine, in health and relaxation, and in spiritual opening and going into the depths of it. It was never planned, but I feel very fortunate actually that through the need in the social context of the surrounding villages and at that time that unemployment, that we started to work with making music instruments. I think actually in that way all the different aspects of my journey in one way came together and grounded, really anchored in matter. So working with the material instrumentations of vibrations, or the material foundation for it. And I see basically 3 main outcomes and purposes of that work with SVARAM. The first generation naturally was the possibility of creating instruments which everybody can play. Everybody can have a direct contact with the magic touch of sound. Yeah? And it says it even in our motto. I think SVARAM brings the joy of music and the magic touch of sound into everyone's hands and heart. And so that was the first generation, what we said, this is our world music instruments, which are as simple, and some of them, they can be quite intricate and one can work for years with it, but the immediate touch is there. So it doesn't need any precondition, and from children and housewives and managers, anybody can have that experience of joy. Just the joy of playing with those instruments. So that's the whole first gamut. And of course, in its extension, it can be used then into education, into relaxation, for personal growth, for the power of expression and all of that. Now, what happened then we had a request actually to participate in a healing center and bring in some sound modalities. And then I had learned many years ago in Switzerland with a master to build those sound beds, basically, which have 50 strings, and you have this direct vibroacoustic touch with sound. And then I think over the course of must have been 8 years, basically, we created our sonorium, which is a very intricately and scientifically worked out sound space based on the mathematics of music, also in its configurations. There's a whole, I'm saying, science around it, a sonic science of the sonorium. And that's basically, that is a full setup for an environment, an inner environment for therapeutic work, for personal growth work, for working in the healing arts. Yeah? And we offer trainings in that one, and we have established it in the well-being arena. I feel actually that the well-being arena will be the place of a new synthesis between the established allopathic medicine and all the practices in holistic medicine of different traditions and new inventions. I think in the well-being arena, there's a synthesis of those two modalities. We're very happy. We're presently working on one of the world's first clinical well-being centers, which is associated with a hospital, but it's also a well-being retreat center for pre- and post-operative care. And we have our sonorium will be established in that place also. So this is all about the healing arts, healing and transformative arts, I'm saying. And the third factor, basically, of SVARAM instruments, it happened actually again through some invitations and promotions where we were invited to create a sound garden for the first interactive music museum in India. And we co-designed with a famous designer a sound garden. And then basically around SVARAM in our grounds, we had a prototype field where we tried prototypes and we experimented with outdoor installations where families and school classes and management teams and even civil servants, people came and we offered programs. And that's so beautiful. It brings me back to the origin of my story. It's a place in an outdoor environment. It's a nature environment. So there's this sensitivity and the nourishing aspect of being in nature, and at the same time, this play with musical instruments. And that also goes in two ways. There can be a purely receptive play. I can sit down, I can stand amidst those instruments and other people, my friends played, and I just get the impact of the vibrations on my body and I nourish myself with it. I can play with somebody. I can come into a communicative practice or I have my encounter with a thing which I don't know. And I have to explore it and experience my awkwardness, and I explore myself in an interaction with somebody. So that's basically those three modalities in which we're working in SVARAM. It's the personal, intimate contact with instruments. Then it's a deeper going, assisted, mentored, facilitated contact, maybe with a therapist or somebody who is trained in that work. And the third one brings it back really into society, into life, into schools, into institutions. I'm really happy with we have a sense of a renaissance of India, India really possibly coming into its role, fulfilling its dharma as possibly guiding principles in this difficult global situation of a transition of human civilization. And we have so many interesting requests from India, not only from hospitality, but also from educational institutions, from adult educations, from clinics, from hospitals and stuff. So it's basically now music, now that we harnessed its healing, educational and spiritual power to bring it actually into application in all different situations of life.